Technology should be a tool, not our boss. It's been our refrain for the last 4 weeks. Over and over again, if you've been here for the last 4 weeks, or even if you've been here just one of the last 4 weeks, we've said it every single week. A couple of times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, our series are very topically based, and we kind of look at something from a 30,000-foot view perspective and try to take it and make it incredibly practical for ourselves. And we just decided to begin our year with this Pocket God series to say, man, what is a biblical approach to technology in our world today? And this was our refrain over and over again that we see throughout the scriptures. Hey, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Our guest speaker at our Tech Talk, I love what he said. He said, hey, don't be mastered by anything. Just repeating what we find in the Bible. In other words, don't allow something that should be used as a tool in our lives to be that which is our boss, that dictates when we should do things and how we should do things. But ultimately, whether that refrain holds any water or whether it rings true or not, that is up to you. You are the judge and jury in your own walking around life. In other words, the decisions that you make and the way that you run your household and the decisions you make for your children, those are your decisions. But as we conclude our series, I wanted to take a stab at a closing argument. If this were a courtroom and you are the judge and the jury for your life, and this is the refrain, this is the idea, these are the charges, technology should be a tool, not our boss, then I wanted to give a shot at a closing argument. And I wanted to kind of call on one of my role models in life, Matlock. My granddaddy used to watch Matlock nonstop. I just love the way he works the courtroom, He kind of plays dumb at first. How many people have seen Matlock first? Oh, praise the Lord. This is incredible, right? So I don't have to explain much. You know what I'm talking about. He's kind of walking around and he's kind of like, yeah, you're probably right, And then he goes back to his desk and he's looking on a piece of legal pad, like this entire massive case and this guy's life's hinging upon or whatever, and he's got this little yellow notepad that he wrote like 3 notes on. And then he walks back up and he approaches the bench and he has a little thing. And then in the closing argument, he's always got this one-liner, or he always catches the guy or gets him, kind of tricks him into saying what he's not supposed to say and then close it. That's what I want to do. I won't be near as good looking as Matlock because, boy, he's sharp. You know what I'm talking about? I thought about wearing a suit jacket today just to give it a shot, and I was like, no, you're going to just make fun of me the whole time. You won't be able to take me serious. It's not going to work. But that's what I want to try to do. I want to try to make a closing argument. I want to try the very best that I can before I send you out into deliberations. And so this is my best shot. Here it comes. The Apostle Paul is writing to one of his church plants. The Apostle Paul has been church planting. He's been on this church planting journey. He's been in prison. They realized as he was in prison that they probably shouldn't have done some of the things they had done to him. They beat him up pretty good. They didn't realize he was a citizen of Rome. And so the folks that were holding him in prison, when they found that out, Roman citizens had better rights than just regular Jewish folks. And so but Paul was a Jew and a Roman citizen. And so when they found out, they were like, oh, no, we messed up. You know what I'm saying? Oh, boy. That kind of thing, like the shaken kind of thing. And so that's what's happening. They're stuttering over, they can't figure out what to do. They're trying to apologize. Paul is released. He goes on to the next city on the trade route, and he finds himself in a place called Thessalonica. He's on this church planting journey, and he gets here and he begins to meet in the Jewish synagogues, and he does it 3 times or so, and he meets and he just tells about Jesus to the Jewish people. He's just sharing the good news about Jesus, and they're beginning to hear it and to believe it. And then the folks that were there, the Jewish folks and Jewish leaders were there, they began to be jealous, the Bible tells us. And they were so jealous, they went out, and the Bible says that they went and found bad characters, right? These bad men, troublemakers, they went and they gathered them together. And so they brought them together in this mob to attack Paul because they were jealous of all the converts. They were giving their lives and believing in the story in the name of Jesus. And so eventually Paul has to leave Thessalonica. And so we then get this letter written back to that city because Paul couldn't stay as long as he wanted to. He plants this church, he starts this group of believers, but he has to leave prematurely because there's this mob that's formed. And so he leaves, and then he writes this letter back to them and says, hey, I've got more to tell you. I've got more to share with you. I've got more to reinforce with you. Paul writes it because he can't be there in person. It's a very personal letter, and we're going to read through part of the closing statement he makes in this letter, and I think it applies so much to where we are today, sitting in this very room. Follow along with me if you have it. If not, we're going to put it on the screen. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. We'll start with verse 1 and 2. He says, now brothers and sisters, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. And so Paul is starting to address, there's an issue happening where people are starting to figure out, so Jesus has made this promise, I'm going to return. Right? Jesus has been crucified. He's been resurrected. Jesus has gone to the Father. But before he did, he said, I will be back, and I'll be back for you. And so this church is like, when is he coming back? And then they're looking around. They're trying to figure out when he's going to come back. Let's do the calculations. Let's do the math. Let's dissect his words. Let's figure out there's a hidden key or a hidden code inside of us. Let's figure this out. And so it's causing a little bit of disturbance and some problems. And so Paul's just like, hey, here's the deal. You already know the answer to this. Nobody knows when he's coming back. In fact, Jesus himself doesn't know when he's coming back. God knows, and he'll tell Jesus, hey, Jesus, it's time to go. It's your time. That's what's going to happen. I don't know if he has a watch. God probably doesn't have a watch. But that's what's going to happen. God is going to tell Jesus, Jesus is going to go. And so these people here in this city, in this church, trying to figure out something Jesus himself doesn't know. And so Paul is writing them and saying, hey, stop arguing. It's fine. Let me just remind you, nobody knows. When he says the day of the Lord, he's talking about Judgment Day, Christ's return, the day of accountability. People are trying to figure out, some even claiming they figured it out. But Paul's saying, hey, it doesn't matter though. It doesn't matter because you don't know. And then he gives a warning. He gives a warning. 1 Thessalonians 5, we'll go to verse 3. It says, while people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. He says, not only do you not know, in this process of trying to figure out what's going to happen, when it does happen, when this thing you're trying to figure out actually comes to fruition, when it happens, it's going to just happen like this. People are going to be talking about peace and safety. Everything will be fine. In their world, they'll be using those two phrases. Oh, it's so peaceful here. We feel so safe. And then all of a sudden, here comes Jesus, right? Out of nowhere, it will be a surprise. Like labor pains in a pregnant woman, they will not be able to escape it, he says. In that moment, when Jesus decides to return, there's nothing they can do at that point to escape what's coming. It's a little tongue-in-cheek that Paul is saying. He's talking about they'll be declaring this reign of peace and safety in their world. And yet when Jesus comes back for folks that aren't ready, it's not going to be very peaceful or very safe for them. In fact, it'll be the opposite of that because there is a day of accountability that's coming, Paul says. In this world that's consumed by anxious thoughts, with no one to turn to other than their need for the circumstances to change, they will declare peace and safety. In other words, in our world where anxious thoughts just kind of runs amok and it kind of consumes us and takes over who we are, for folks without Jesus, we then require our circumstances to change. In order for me to be peaceful, I must have peaceful circumstances. In order for me to feel safe, I must be in a place that's actually legitimately safe. Whereas from a Jesus follower standpoint, he says you can be in the midst of chaos and still find peace. And in the midst of places where it's really not safe for you, you know that you can still be safe within the arms of Jesus. Like eternally, spiritually safe in the arms of Jesus. He says, and that's the huge difference, right? That's the alarming difference for these folks. For followers of Jesus, we can have peace in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. And so he says the surprise will be twofold. The surprise will be, number one, the timing that Jesus returns. People will have no idea, right? And that's if you're a follower of Jesus or not a follower of Jesus. The timing is a mystery to us both. However, the thing that's not a mystery for people who are following Jesus is that it will be Jesus. Because there will be a large group of people on the planet that when Jesus returns, they're going to be like, oh no, that's the guy they were talking about. In that moment. And then for the Jesus followers, they're going to be like, we knew you'd come. There won't be a surprise in those moments on that end. And the who, it's just the when. And so we share this common idea of just unknown in terms of time, but the who is not a surprise to us, he says. It'll be quite a sight. He reminds them in the midst of this really big and heavy reminder that there's this day of atonement, this day of accountability, this day of judgment, this day of Jesus, the day of the Lord as it's coming. That very weighty realization that, hey, don't worry about figuring it out. You know he's coming. You won't be able to figure out when, but this is a reality. There will be people that claim this peace and safety over their lives, and when he shows up to ultimately bring real peace and safety, they will not be peaceful and they will not be safe. He says, let me remind you who you are. In verse 4 and 5, he says, but you, brothers and sisters, are not in darkness, so this day should not surprise you like a thief. You are all children of the light and children of the day. We do not belong to the night or to the darkness. You see, we all, as followers of Jesus, we're all aware that this is part of the story of God. Jesus will return. He will return. The timing will be a surprise. Jesus will not be a surprise. And then Paul begins to cast a vision of identity. He says, don't forget, you are people of light. You are people of the day. You are not people of darkness. You don't live in darkness. You don't do your dealings at night. You're people of the light. This was an incredibly familiar theme. Jesus, he says it this way in the book of Matthew. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Paul's attempting to show this contrast. In the midst of this question of when will Jesus return, he just simplifies it and says, you know he will. No one knows when he will. But you don't have to worry. You don't have to be consumed with peace and safety on this day of reckoning, this day of the Lord. You don't have to be concerned with that because you are people of light, that Jesus is the light. That you are people of the day. You are not people of darkness. You ever heard that phrase, nothing good happens after midnight? Anyone's mama ever told you that? They're like, hey, you need to be home. Don't nothing good happen after midnight, you know? Some folks remember when you were said, hey, I don't even want you to wait till midnight. You need to be home before the street lights come on, you know? That's when you need to be home. This distinction is made in the mind of Jesus and in the mind of Paul, where he says, how can I establish with folks the difference between right and wrong in a way that they can visually see it? And they say it's the difference between night and day. In terms of your behavior and the way you interact with the world, it's the difference between night and day. And as Jesus kind of reminds us in that one passage, as Paul reminds us, they understand the distinction, and they hope that we gather that distinction from their teaching. But I guess the question for us is, how do we distinguish our moments of light and our moments of darkness? I often ask kids when they come and talk about baptism, when they come and talk about, hey, I want to give my entire life to Jesus. I ask them, how do you know what's right and wrong? how do you know the difference between good and bad? Like, who taught you these things? And ultimately, after that conversation has gone on, I then go to the next question. Well, who taught your parents those things? Or who taught your teacher those things? And eventually we get to the question, ultimately, who decides the difference between good and bad? And the answer becomes God. God is the one who decides what is right and ultimately what is wrong, what is daylight and what is nighttime. One of our values here at Foundation is influence. And a lot of times people see that maybe on our website, and the first thing they go to is, oh, they value the ability to have influence in their community. Maybe they have political aspirations or something like that, or they want to have power in the community, and that's not our value at all. Our value is influence in your life, and not our influence as in the church's influence in your life, but God's influence in our life. That we look at who we are and what we do and what we have, those three areas, who we are, what we do, and what we have, and we ask that very simple question, does God have influence in that? Whether you're an IT guy or a firefighter or EMS or a school teacher or a principal or retired or a stay-at-home mom or your yoga instructor or whatever it is in between, does God have influence in what you do? Is he the one that sets the direction in who you are? Ultimately, in that particular compartment of your life, does he get to decide what's good and bad? Or do you look for another source of morality and right and wrong in those compartments? Or are you satisfied with God having influence in all of those pieces and who you are and what you do and what you have? And so we value that role of influence of God in our life. In fact, it's one of the most difficult questions that adults can answer when we have conversations together. When we talk about marriage, that is often a reoccurring theme. Inside of those arguments and those tough times, who is deciding what is right and what is wrong? Is it the one who speaks the loudest? Is it the one who talks the fastest? Is it the one who brings it up first? Is it the one who doesn't say anything and refuses to talk about it? They get to decide what's right and wrong? Or does God have influence in those moments? Are both collectively looking at God saying, hey, you can have reign here in the midst of this conflict. You can decide what's right and what's wrong. That's what Paul's attempting to get across to his audience. They are so concerned about this return of Jesus that some are preoccupying themselves with figuring it out when. And he's saying, look around, there are people that will not only be surprised by the timing like all of us, but there are people in your lives that will be surprised that Jesus came back at all, or that Jesus is a real boy, That they're going to look at him and say, I thought that was just a fairy tale. And I wonder if, after they look at Jesus, if they're going to scan the room to find you and say, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? And maybe you would say, I did. I invited you to church. And then I hope Jesus takes a time out and comes down and flicks you in your ear. And it's like, you thought telling them about me was inviting them to church? That's what you thought? In other words, you thought and telling them about me was inviting them to listen to someone else stand on a stage and tell them about me. That's what you thought? Paul's trying to bring them to this conclusion of, hey, if you want to worry about something, don't worry about when, because you ain't going to figure it out. Worry about the people who will be satisfied with the peace and safety they can have and create for themselves within this context. Think about that. If you want to worry yourself over something, worry about those people that will be surprised that Jesus is a real guy. Preoccupy yourself with them, he says. And so then he begins to hammer it home. He says this in verse 6 through 10. Starting in verse 6 and 7. It says, so then let us not be like others who are asleep, but let us be awake and sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who get drunk at night. In other words, there's this sleep and drunkenness that's connected to darkness here in this passage. And he's not talking about you laying your head on your Tempur-Pedic at night or hanging at the bar for one or two drinks too many. He's not talking about those physical things. He's talking about spiritual sleep and spiritual drunkenness. Spiritual sleep is you're not aware of the movements of God because you are passed out spiritually. Spiritual sleep is you can't anticipate the return of Jesus because your eyes are closed and your head is on your spiritual pillow. Spiritual sleep is you are not active in your faith. You are not pursuing, living out your faith because you are too busy counting sheep. Spiritual sleep is you are not engaged in worshiping a God, the Most High God, that is something that's not even on your radar. That's spiritual sleep. And I don't mean when someone's singing songs. I mean both worship within the 1 hour a week and the 167 hours outside of this room every week. When you are not engaged, you are just spiritually asleep. Spiritual drunkenness is that you're not alert to the spiritual consequences that our decisions and actions have on ourselves as well as other people. You're the guy or girl that says, no, it's fine, I'll make it home just fine. And you don't. And neither does the person that was coming at you in the other lane. Spiritual drunkenness is the inability to have control over your thoughts and your actions. That when something happens in your life, you just explode. And so Paul brings it to their attention. But he doesn't just bring it to their attention and say, hey, this is the reality. He backs it up with some tools he wants them to work with. He says, but since we belong to the day, since we belong to the daytime, since we belong to the day, let us be sober, putting on faith and love as a breastplate and the hope of salvation as a helmet. For God did not appoint us to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. He died so that whether we are awake or asleep, we may live together with him. Now, he makes a change there at the end. I don't want you to get confused. He says, whether we are awake or asleep, we may live together with him. He's changing up the metaphors. So he's not going back to the spiritual sleep. He's talking about whether you're alive or dead. Either way, as long as we have clothed ourselves in those things, putting on faith and love as a breastplate, the hope of salvation, as long as we have those things, whether we're dead or alive or awake or asleep, we still have that promise that we would live together with him when Jesus returns. And so he says, here's the deal. So to stay spiritually awake and sober, faith and love as a breastplate, as armor, the hope of salvation as a helmet, both of those are armor pieces. But what is armor used for? Armor is used for protection. Armor is used to protect us from these things that are happening in our world that cause the spiritual drunkenness and the spiritual sleep. And at the end of the day, he says the reason we have access to the spiritual armor to guard us against the spiritual sleep and spiritual drunkenness is because Christ died for us. He says, you want to concentrate on when he's returning? Stop. You can't figure it out. Jesus doesn't know either. So concentrate on what we do know. That there are people that have found themselves peace and safety, but they're not actually peaceful. And they're not all that safe. And they will be surprised at the timing, but they will also be surprised that it's Jesus. And at the end of the day, there is something coming that we have to have armor or protection for. And if you're a follower of Jesus, that protection was given because Jesus put himself on a cross on our behalf. In other words, if you really want to attack this spiritual drunkenness or the spiritual sleep, start at the cross. He says, allowing our lives to push forward from the foot of the cross helps us to avoid spiritual sleep and spiritual drunkenness. He says, if we begin there, if that's our starting point as we go into our world, if we are armed with this idea of salvation and love and hope, if we're armed against these things, then it begins at the cross. In other words, the cross is where our day must begin and where our day must come to its end. Every week, every day. If we want to avoid the spiritual drunkenness, the spiritual sleep, we have to begin at the cross. And then here's his conclusion. I love when a passage starts with therefore, because there's so much weight included in the therefore. Everything he's just said leads to this closing statement, right? Which we didn't even go into the first 4 chapters of Thessalonians, just this 5th thing. So you don't have a complete picture of what all the therefore is. But you do have a decent chunk in size. And so he says here, therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. In light of all the heavy thought and all the heavy truth that comes in this last chapter, to this church that he loves, to the church he didn't get to spend enough time with, he had to leave prematurely, to this church that's beginning to grow, but starting to grapple with things that don't matter, and maybe their eyes are getting a little off of where the ball is supposed to be. It's like, hey, keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on the people that are lost. Keep your eye on the people that have this false sense of safety and security and false sense of peace that you know will not last. Keep your eye on them. Then in all those things, if you begin at the cross, it allows you to do this very simple thing. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. Light is contagious, isn't it? Man, have you ever been asleep early in the morning and you have a child that's like, you know what? I think I'm going to turn the light on. And they say, I'm just turning it on for a second, Dad. It's fine. I just got to find something. Yeah, we can't say that in church, can we? You know what I'm saying? Light is just like, goodness gracious. But after time, your eyes adjust to it. Light. It's so good when you're working on the car in the driveway and you got started a little late and you're working on it and like it's going and you're right in the thick of it and the sun started to go down so it's gotten darker and you can't quite see anymore, but you're still trying to, you're like, oh God, I'm so close. And then someone, a friend or your wife or your kid is like, hey, you want a light? I've got it, I'm fine, I'm almost there, And then they come back like 15 minutes later, it's completely down. You got your cell phone that's sticking up there over the hood that's fallen a couple times. You call it on the truck, it's fine, and you put it back up. Is this only me I'm talking about? Okay, so they put it there and like, you want a light? It's like, no, it's fine. And then finally they just take some initiative, and that's what they should have done the first time, and they go get the light out of your shed, and they bring it and they hook it in and they hang it, and this huge, amazing shop light with the cool little clamp that goes on the hood, and you can see everything like it's daytime, and you finish it in 10 seconds. You know what I'm talking about? You feeling me? Anybody? Okay, it's just me. Light is so good, especially when you've been trying to work in the dark. Light is so good. When you take light to someone that's in the middle of a dark place, it builds them up, it makes them stronger, it makes them understand that they can finish the work, that they can do the job. And this makes so much sense to us, doesn't it? It makes so much sense. If you're a follower of Jesus, it's like, yeah, of course, why would I be so consumed about when Jesus is going to come back? Because he's going to come back. He's faithful to his promise. I don't need to preoccupy myself with that. I should preoccupy myself to the people that it will be a surprise when they see him. And I'll put my efforts into there because they have this false sense of peace and security. But I am people of the light, and they are living in darkness, and so I know that they're trying to work on this peace and security. So when I show up with light, then all of a sudden it's not a bedroom flipping it on. They're trying to figure out what is real peace, what is real security. And so I'm the guy that comes and hangs the shop light as they're trying to figure out how to make something they rely on function in their life. And suddenly it's like, man, I love light. And I love that you brought your light into my life. It makes sense to us to build one another and to encourage one another. And yet for some reason, when we get on Facebook, we forget. 79% of internet users in the United States participate in Facebook. 79%. I'm not sure if you have noticed, there's an election this year. I have to take it head on because we have to be different. And if you're in here and you're hardcore blue or red, and you're going to say, and you're thinking in your mind, boy, don't tell me what I can and can't post to persuade my friends. I'm hardcore about this. Could I ask you to be hardcore about Jesus first? Because at the end of the day, our fact-checking or unfact-checking, our political statements and our political views, you want to see hate? Give it 6 more months. And it will begin to seep out of people that you never saw it coming from. And we have to be different. Much of social media, even outside of the context of what happens in our world, has this tendency to be negative. Few and far between are the days where we could go an entire week without someone just setting us off in this rage. I guess the question we have to ask this morning as I make my closing argument for technology being our tool and not our boss is, how do we stay spiritually awake and spiritually sober online? Because it's such an enormous part of our lives. We share so many things digitally with our neighbors and with our friends and family and our community. We share so many things. Can we allow God to have influence in that particular place? Can He be the one that decides what is right and what is wrong in what you're going to put online? Can He be the person that decides that? Or have we kind of compartmentalized it a bit and said, hey, no, this is my feed. It's not really who I am. It's just some of my thoughts and some of my ramblings, and I just have to get them out. This is the easiest way to get them out. Maybe can I suggest a mirror with the door closed and no one else watching, and then you can get out what you need to get out. And then it stays there. I understand. You've all had that person. I'm thinking of the person in my head right now that every time you get on, it's like you want to read what they wrote just because you know it's going to piss you off. You're like, you know what? I'm just ready to fight today. So I'm just going to type his name in first, go straight to his profile, and just look at it just because I'm just ready to be mad. And that's what I want to do. And then you're like, you know, and I'm so much smarter than him. If he says, I just can't wait till he does say something because I'm ready. I've got 17 sentences I have carefully crafted that I'm going to post right there, and his whole world's going to come undone, right? I know. I got kicked out of a Braves fan group this year. No, I did. I was right, by the way. I was right. Talk bad about Snicker to my face and let's see what happens, okay? Don't mess with my homies. I know you look at a post and you're like, yeah, they're spiritually drunk right now. They don't know what they're doing. And so we think, well, I'll take a shot at that and jump in with you. And we've got to figure out another way. It's supposed to be a tool, not a boss. I said at the beginning that we decided to do about 3 series that are really topical each year. And the goal of these, going right out the gate, is super practical. Like, we want to give you tools and things to put into practice, like, immediately. Not things to kind of stew about and like, okay, let me go. This is for deep discussion, but just like, hey, this is just some facts, and man, this is super practical. And so over the first 3 weeks, at the end of each talk, we had some challenges. We had some action items for you. And so we wanted to conclude our series with something that we're just calling 5 Days of Good. And so we've just put together this challenge of, hey, maybe you can see social media in a different light for the next 5 days. And so we're asking that you make a commitment for 5 days, and you reevaluate after your 5 days. But did you say, hey, I'm not doing anything negative. I'm not corresponding with anything negative. That's it. But on top of that, we've got a different little piece every single day to kind of challenge. And I'm going to just briefly walk through them. I want to spend some time on number 3 because it's going to be something we all do together. So this is something I'm asking everybody to do, right? Just wholeheartedly. You don't have to sign up for it or register for it. There's no hashtag. It's nothing like that. This is just it. So we're going to put this out on social media so that you can see it. And we'll post about it each day at the beginning of the day so you can see what the day is supposed to be and what the challenge is. But here it is. So day 1, we're going to ask you to donate to a cause. Facebook allows you to donate to nonprofits and causes. Our church is off limits. Do not donate to our church tomorrow. It's day 1. It's Monday. Not us. If you are looking for one in particular, Bridging the Gap is one that we would wholeheartedly support. Coweta Force, our partner for drug and addiction in our area, that's another one that we would heavily support. Coweta Pregnancy Services, another one we would wholeheartedly support. So if you need one, you're like, I don't have a connection. Those are 3 that we're heavily connected to. And so just tomorrow, it doesn't matter what the amount is. Some of you can give more than others, but that's it. And as what our normal thing is, when we ask you to do something with money, if you have to choose between putting offering in the offering bucket here in a few moments and doing this challenge tomorrow, we would say do the challenge tomorrow. That it's super important for you to begin this. I would also encourage you to challenge your friends to do the same. That's part of the post. And so you could give privately, but we want to use social media for this because when you give on social media, other people can see, oh, that's cool. I didn't know you could give on social media, which they can. You just go to any nonprofit page and you click on it. They won't even know sometimes it's coming. They might even have a fundraiser set up, but you can still give. And then you get this check from Facebook. It's really cool. We get them every once in a while because people just randomly give to us. It just comes in the mail. It's kind of a nice surprise because you didn't know it was coming, And so do that. That's day 1. Day 2 is called a tag from the past. And so you find someone that you're friends with that made an enormous impact in your life from your past and tag them and just share, hey, I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for 4th grade teacher, 1st grade teacher, Boy Scout, troop huddle, whatever it might be. Whatever that person is, you just spend some time thinking. And on Tuesday, you just say, hey, share a story about someone that deeply impacted you. And what's going to happen is someone else is going to read your story, and they're going to immediately think back to the person in their life that was big and helping mold and shape them. Day 3, this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, is just a simple question, how can I pray for you? And so our hope is that 400 people or so on Wednesday will start their morning by posting on their social media, how can I pray for you today? And then if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of folks that are on leadership that have done it. You've probably seen it on your friends list. And then people just comment all day. And then collectively as a church from 8:45 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Wednesday night, I would like for you to stop and go ahead and put on your calendar, and all of us would pray collectively together wherever you're at for those 15 minutes about the people that comment on your post, right? That you would just one by one, if you've got a family at home, that you would bring them together and you would just go over them, the comments, and that you would just spend time praying together on Wednesday night. On Thursday, make someone laugh. And so that's just, it's really that self-explanatory. Find the funniest thing you can find and then just show it. I should have showed you the video that I couldn't get enough of this past week. There's this, I'm not going to explain it to you. That's what I'm going to post probably on Thursday. No, it can't be yours if it's mine, Aaron. I'm kidding. You had it first. It's fine. It's fine. Break my heart. It's fine. I'll figure something else out. Last thing, number 5, and this one's pretty huge. I want you to share why Jesus, and you need to be careful with this. And so, social media is filled with people who are just disconnected from who Jesus is. And so, if you don't have the ability to really think through how to not be super churchy and Bible beater with this, you should reach out to someone who's not very super churchy and Bible beater with it. Because there's got to be a genuine response to why Jesus, not a holier than thou approach with a bunch of language that your friends are going to be like, you don't ever talk like that, but all of a sudden you start posting churchy things. Where did this vocabulary come from? Like legitimately from your heart, hey, this is why I've chosen Jesus. And so we put it that last because I think it takes a little bit of thought. It doesn't need to be this immense paragraph. It could be one simple sentence. But just, hey, here it is. This is why Jesus. And so we're asking 5 days of good. And maybe you'll be encouraged to say, you know what, maybe I should continue this good piece as I go. Maybe my eyes and my focus should be on the people that will be surprised that Jesus really is real and that he has come back. And that would be your focus, not the things that really don't matter. That's my closing argument. Because at the end of the day, we just have too many important things to concentrate and focus on than tearing each other up or ripping each other apart. Because at the end of the day, people are just trying to find safety and peace. But we know that if they don't know Jesus, it's not real safety and it's not real peace. So let us not waste our time arguing with them on things that don't matter. Turn your focus to investing in building others up, to encouraging them to finding real peace and real safety. Would you be someone of the light? Would you avoid the spiritual drunkenness and the spiritual sleep by beginning and ending your day at the cross? That's my closing argument. Ultimately, it's up for you to decide. It's your life. So you are judge and jury.